You should definitely be there.
All right, good evening. We'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting for August 3rd, 2022. I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Ebler is on the Zoom call. So we have the members of the commission on the panel up here, as well as Commissioner Ebler. Are there any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose? Okay,
No.
hearing none. We'll move on to general public comment. I want to note that there's two items on the agenda tonight. One is the site plan approval for the Public Works building on 30th. The second is the Sleds ordinance. And we did close the public comment on the Sleds ordinance last meeting, but if you are here to comment on that, you should provide your public comment in the general public comment section of the meeting, which is this time that's going to come up right here. So if you're here to speak on sleds, make sure and do it now during the general public comment. If you're here to speak on the Public Works building, you can do that at that time on that item. So I have a number of cards here, and I'll just go one by one to see if you're here for general public comment. If you are, then come up and speak. If not, then I'll hold the card until the Public Works facility. All right, so we'll open the general public comment. Again, if you're here for any item that's not on the agenda, you'll be given 3 minutes and to give your public comment. Chris Cowley, are you here for general public comment? Okay.
Hi, my name is Chris Cowley. I live at 6985 Canyon Creek Circle, and I just wanted to make a couple of comments about Big Cottonwood Creek and the impact that we can have as a community in making that really a very accessible amenity for the community. And I applaud the efforts of the Planning Commission and the staff at looking at the riparian zones and the protections there. I think the pathway along there with the historic signage along it is something that adds a lot to our community, and a lot of visitors go through there. They see that, see the history of the area, but also wondering about having Big Cottonwood Creek Road designated a historic roadway, as that was used historically by the settlers of the valley to access both Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon. And those are my comments. And again, I appreciate all the efforts of the Planning Commission and the staff in trying to make our community better. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, the next card I have is Sherry Lagrange.
Hi, I live on 6601 South Lundy Court, and our house is right adjacent to 3000 East, and the glass recycling container is right by, right there behind our house. It has become such a nuisance for us. The times that they're supposed to drop off glass is between 10 in the morning and until 9 o'clock at night, or maybe it's just the opposite, but it's till 10 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. That glass, people are recycling glass around the clock, and it is so noisy that our bedroom window faces that. And I've brought that up to a couple of people in the city council, and it just gets ignored. And something needs to be done to regulate that. Either a policeman, we could call the police every single time that people are dropping off glass. I have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work. People are always recycling glass, throwing glass in there, and it's really, really noisy if you've ever lived next to a glass recycling container. And so that's one comment. And so something needs to be done about that regulation. Also, I really love the new planning for the whatever it's called, the Cottonwood, what's that called, that we know for the snow plows, but nothing was said about what you're going to do about that glass recycling container. And if you want to decrease the amount of people coming in and out of on 3000 East, that'd be a good way, is to get rid of that container and move it somewhere else, because there is so much traffic and so many people recycling and using that particular container. And it's really become a nuisance, and it's a gigantic mess. Nobody ever cleans up any of the glass around it. And I've complained several times because I cross the street and I walk along the creek, and there's just glass everywhere, and they don't ever come and clean it up. And so that's one thing to be considered when you guys built this big, new, beautiful building for our snowplows and everything. And is there, where can we see some action on that to monitor the times that people can dispose of their glass so it's not quite so noisy? Am I even talking to the right people?
maybe not, but I think staff is here and they're able to, I would maybe ask, I don't know, Mike, if who would be on staff for that item?
Yeah, it's at our Public Works yard, so I can get you contact info for our Public Works Director. I-
I've talked to those people.
To,
I've put in so many calls, nothing ever gets done. So, I mean, past that person and past the person that's in charge of that recycling container, I
So-
can't remember his name.
so probably the city manager then, Tim Tingy is who you'll want to talk to. Okay.
So something needs to be done.
Thank you, Sherry. All right, George Lagrange. Just as a reminder, if it is about the Public Works, we'll have public comment about that item later. But if you're giving general public comment about an item that's not on the Public Works site,
I was going to comment about the new building.
okay, let's hold that until that item on the agenda, which will be next after this.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you. Dave,
I also wanted to comment about the last recycling too. So should I do that at the same time?
yeah, I think since it's related to that item. David Barry?
I'm here to comment on the riparian area of the sleds. And by the way, I think it's totally deceptive and dishonest to say that the riparian section is amendments or changes to what exists, because there's nothing that exists on riparian, and we need to make that absolutely clear right now. That is not minor changes. It is a complete whole new cloth. There's not a word in the existing ordinances defining riparian or anything about it, and it's dishonest to say otherwise. Deceptive. Number two, I am requesting that you reopen the comment period on, at least as to the riparian. I really think it should be, and reasonable notice should be given to people, which has not occurred, in my opinion. We know who the landowners are along the creeks, and they need to get actual notice. For some reason, someone seems to be thinking that that's too expensive. I think not. If the city can send out 600 mailer notices to people who live along the parade routes for one day's activities, they darn well can send out notices to the creek owners. We own the creek. Literally. The creek is not a public right of way. We own to the middle of the creek from both sides. It is owned by us, and most of us have water rights to the creek, so we own water in the creek, literally. Own the creek and the water in the creek. Notice needs to be given. Finally, I think this proposal is not ready for prime time, not even close. I'm writing things up and I will submit them, and I admit I am meeting with some of the city staff tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and anyone else that wants to come, I'm sure they'd be willing to have you there too. Let's touch a few things. We are in the 25-foot zone for an existing house and property. I can't remove a dead tree without getting a certified arborist. I might even be required under these regs to get an environmental engineer to tell me that tree should be removed. I can't use a chainsaw because it's mechanized to remove a 100-foot cottonwood that's going to fall on my house or on the power line. Oh, by the way, your regs would prevent the power company from going through and doing what they do that they're required to do to keep cottonwoods and different trees from approaching within the 15 to 20 foot, depending on the size of the power lines, of the power lines. You can't even do that. So you're putting the utility companies in a position where you're going to have fires from power lines? Really? That's what you're saying in here. Nothing, oh, and they couldn't use a chainsaw to cut something down even if they were allowed to do that. I cannot replace a sprinkler head on my existing property without getting some environmental report because it's listed under AR. I can't replace a hole in my sprinkler pipe. Now, you may think that's taking these regulations too far, but that's the way you wrote them. If you don't want it to be that way, don't write it that way. This is not ready for prime time. You may say existing structures, maintenance of an existing structure. Most of us who live along Little Cottonwood Creek have had major floods. When we were first moved in 1993, April of 93, we had floods for the first 5 years. We were on the hot list for Salt Lake County flood control. We had crews out there putting in sandbags. By the way I read this, we couldn't even put in sandbags right now. We'd have to just let it flood the house. By the way, large cottonwoods come down that creek up to 100 feet tall. They hit one bank and careen across and create a dam across the other. When that happens, it is life-threatening, not only to the existing house, but all the houses downstream because it dams it up. Salt Lake County Flood Control comes in with heavy equipment immediately to remove that tree and debris. Oh, that won't be allowed under the way you wrote your regulations. There's nothing in here about emergencies. You couldn't even get a fire truck on some of our homes that are within a very close distance of the creek to put out a fire. These regulations are not ready for prime time. Even Salt Lake Flood Control, which is the only easement that goes down the creek right now, even Salt Lake Flood Control would not be allowed to bring down a grader and do maintenance with heavy equipment in the creek. He didn't make an exception for that. These regs are not ready for prime time. The period needs to be reopened. You are making changes, even as I heard it tonight and last week. It needs to be reopened for comment. It needs to be looked at. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be certain regulations. People should not be able to push dirt out into the creek and put patios on it. But at the same time, these regs, as written, are not ready to be put out.
Thank you, Dave. All right, Stephen Olson.
Thank you. I also live on Little Cottonwood Creek, and a year ago we were here talking about an attempt to put a path along the creek, which was changed gratefully, but we're here again dealing with the same issue that has to do with our rights of use to our private property, which are changing ordinances and uses. And just want to make reference to the Constitution that protects the property rights through the 5th and 14th Amendment, and allows government to take property under certain conditions. One is an outright condemning of the property and taking title. And number two is through regulations that take uses. And that's what we're dealing with here. You're wanting to take uses away from the property that devalues property, and leave the title owner with so-called regulatory takings. The point is that the presumption of the common law was that on the side of free use, and that's being changed here. People were not required and are not required to obtain a permit before using their own property. That is just as people today are not required to obtain a permit before speaking. Rather, the burden was on those who objected to a given use to show that it violated a specific right of theirs. People acquire property, after all, only because doing so enables them to use it, which is what gives it value. Indeed, the fundamental complaint about uncompensated regulatory takings is that by thus eliminating some or all of the uses owners may make of their property, government makes the title they retain that much less valuable, even worthless in extreme cases. Who would buy a property that cannot be used in the way they desire? So as owners, we're asking simply that government obey the law, both the common law and the constitutional law. Reduced to its essence, we are saying simply to stop taking property without paying for it. I've lived there for 32 years. I've spent thousands of dollars maintaining the river, the bank, and the bottom of the bank. I've brought in truckloads of boulders to build weirs so that the erosion will be controlled. That creek has dropped 4 to 5 feet since we lived there in depth, and will continue unless there's provisions to maintain the creek bottom. And the property owners are bearing that cost, not the government. And so I just think we're headed the wrong direction, thinking that property users don't want to maintain a quality of their own property and are spending the money to do that. And to have government restrict our uses, I think is not the right of government. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stephen. Ed Promosic.
Very well done. Thank you. Hi again, I'm Ed Promosic. My wife and I live at 6977 Canyon Creek Circle, Cottonwood Heights. Thanks to all of you for your tireless efforts to make our community a better place to live. I'm very anxious to hear the proposed changes to sleds. I'm aware you've all received substantial input over the last several months, and I'm hopeful of your support of the additional riparian setback protection. Going forward, I'd again propose Big Cottonwood Canyon Road be designated a historic roadway. Additionally, I hope you're amenable to some historic markers, such as those along the walking trail between Fort Union Boulevard and the retention pond adjacent to the Cottonwood Corporate Center. I'd also, once again, offer my support for maintaining the current underlying zoning regarding the old mill property, the property east of Cottonwood Stream, pretty much all of the Walker property, as well as the undeveloped land at the north end of the Canyon Creek Circle. To me, it would seem highly inappropriate for any commercial development to occur immediately contiguous to existing residential housing. In closing, I'd like all of you to know I am not anti-development. I realized 10 years ago upon purchasing our dream home that one day the surrounding land would be developed. The current rumors of commercial development would appear to require a very egregious zoning change. I'm hopeful that planning and zoning, as well as our city council, are sensitive to these requests and act thoughtfully and responsibly. Finally, thanks again for the opportunity to voice my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Next, we have Alan Fletcher.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to thank the Planning Commission and staff for all of their hard work that went into the riparian protective study that was approved earlier. I'm in full support of development in a planned fashion, but the study that was put forth and the setbacks that were approved are clearly in everyone's best interest. I'm one of the guys that filled sandbags to protect some homes along the stream when homes and structures were built too close to it, and so I can speak with some experience that's a great project, but it's no fun. And so those setbacks are not only appropriate, but they're very, very necessary. And I laud the efforts by staff and everyone who put time and effort into this to make sure that we don't have those problems happening again. And I appreciate all the efforts by the staff and by the commission in putting this together, and I appreciate your hard work and efforts, and look forward to the city council carrying that forward and seeing it as part of our ongoing effort to develop that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I got a new card from Mark McDonald. Is that a general public comment?
This is just on the follow-up on the same,
Sled's
topic,
ordinance.
yeah, the
Okay.
topic. The ironic thing I'm hearing here tonight is example, Steve Olson brought it up briefly, but then 3 years ago, I was over here at the meeting here, and the planning commission, they wanted to put a public walkway through all of our private property. And this walkway, as if we don't have plenty of places to walk, the streets, the gymnasiums, the parks we have around here. We go walking there anywhere we want, but they wanted to put something, they wanted to put a walkway through my backyard. And the word riparian, never heard it. Riparian was never brought up in all those meetings I was over here talking about. So the commission wanted to plan a walkway down through the creek bed. Heavens knows how many bridges and all the equipment that would be needed to maintain that type of a project, but also all the gum wrappers and water bottles and everything else that the public would have brought to our backyards. Why did we waste all of our time even discussing all of that? I mean, we've done a 180. I mean, it's totally ridiculous to go from this public walkway through my backyard. The other thing we need to be careful about is a lot of those rocks that are in that creek weigh several tons. And the only way to move them and to maintain them is to have heavy access to have heavy equipment in. And the perfect example is right in my backyard. I happen to be on a straightway of the creek, but there's a curve behind my neighbors, and they had heavy equipment in there for probably 3 weeks here about 3 years ago, because on the one runoff, it was basically taking away that whole stream bed. So there's always going to be maintenance to that area. But it seems to me we just got this Willy Wonka type development type issues. I think we need to bring a little more common sense to what we're talking about. I don't know what I mean, this is going to prevent me from fertilizing my lawn in my backyard now, as Dave brought up. I know when I called the county here to come, cottonwood tree had fallen over in the creek 2 years ago. I called them up and found the people to come over and do that. Well, they brought their chainsaws. They didn't show up with hatchets and a shovel. They brought their chainsaws. That's how you have to get a cottonwood tree out of there. So I think you have to have those fine points and the detail points in your planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I'm holding George's comment on the next item, but that's the end of the comment cards I've received. Is there anyone else here that would like to provide general public comment? Is there anyone online that would like to provide general public comment? I see a few participants online. No hands raised. All right. Seeing no more hands, then we'll go ahead and close the public comment for tonight's meeting and move on to our business items. The first item on the agenda is project SPL 22002. This is a public hearing to receive comments and take possible action on a city-initiated request for the site plan approval of a new public works building at 6579 South, 3000 East in the public facility PF zone. We'll start with an explanation from staff, and then we'll move on to public comment on this item, starting with George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give a brief overview of the request for the benefit of those in attendance or for those listening online who weren't able to attend the work session. Just review the same information again. So the request for a site plan approval for a public works building addition, 6579 South, 3000 East. Aerial view, we have the property highlighted in red on the screen for you. You can see just east of 30th East in the area near Big Cottonwood Canyon Road and Cottonwood Corporate Center. Here's a street view of the property. You can see what's currently there now is a building for storage of salt and other equipment that the Public Works Department uses. There's no storage area for the snow plows. So that's the main purpose for this request, is to build an addition for indoor storage where those plows could be stored away from the weather and the elements. This is in the public facility zone. Of course, it's a public facility. This is a public use. Those are permitted in this zone. What's being requested is a 21,645 square foot building addition. This will include parking area out front, some landscaping, and some street improvements. And as I mentioned, the main function is to provide storage space for snow plows. And then there will also be some office space for our Public Works Department. The site plan approval is required because our zoning ordinance requires site plan review for any governmental use. That's why the Planning Commission is reviewing this tonight. It's a permitted use as opposed to a conditional use. Frequently, Planning Commission gets to hear conditional use permits, impose additional conditions based on public feedback, perceived negative impacts. In this case, because it's already permitted, we just need to do the site plan review to ensure that everything's in compliance with the requirements of the code. So to go through the requirements of the code, we'll just go through one by one, show what has been reviewed so far. This is in the public facilities zone. So the front setback, the required setback's 25 feet. The new building is proposed at 26 feet. You can see the setbacks marked on the image on the screen. Minimum side setback is 20 feet. On that north side, that corner is 20 feet away from the property line at the closest point. It's more than 90 feet to the south, so well exceeding the minimum requirements. And then the minimum rear setback is 30 feet. We are adding on to the front of that existing storage building, so nothing will be added to the back. That existing setback will be preserved. Maximum lot coverage in the zone is 50% for all structures. This building is approximately 16% of the lot size. And that's total with the addition and what's existing. Maximum height in this zone is 35 feet. What's proposed is 28 feet. It's below the maximum allowed. Parking, I guess we've got 15 stalls in the front. As we discussed in the work session, there is additional employee parking available in the back that will also be provided. But in that case, in either case, it's more than the minimum that's required. 15 is the required minimum. 16 is what's provided, at least in the front for the public. Okay, sorry. Okay, there we go. Lighting standards we reviewed briefly, but basically all light fixtures need to be full cutoff, meaning that they're not shining upwards or outwards. They're all directed downward toward the ground. They cannot be more than 25 feet tall. In this case, all the parking lot lights have been reviewed. They will be 25-foot max, full cutoff LEDs pointing downwards. The average illumination at finished grade level shall be between 1/2 and 2.5 foot candles. We've required them to submit plans reviewing that. The average illumination proposed is 1.23, which falls within that range. Maximum is 10-foot candles. What's proposed is a maximum of 5.3. And then the overall illumination, the lumens per acre, so just the overall, including all of the lights on the buildings and in the parking lot, in this zone can't exceed 50,000 lumens per net acre. What was evaluated on the lighting plan was 1.75 acres. The actual size of the entire parcel is, I think it was a 3-point-something acres. So, but even just evaluating that area that's going to include the lights, the maximum would have been 87,500 lumens. What's proposed is a little over 70,000. So In all cases, the lighting plan has been reviewed and is compliant with the code. A couple landscaping requirements. These are new. You may remember we recently updated the landscaping requirements. So at maturity, the total landscape area is recommended to have enough plant material to create living plant cover for at least 50% of the ground plane, excluding tree canopies. And then the other applicable ordinance is that commercial, industrial, institutional, multifamily development, common area landscapes, lawn area shall not exceed 20% of the total landscaped area. In this case, there's no lawn area proposed. So of course that's below 20%. And then, although it says recommended to cover 50%, I believe that we do achieve that coverage with what's proposed between the trees, shrubs, and grasses that are proposed. So with that, we recommend approval with no modifications. The use, as mentioned, is a permitted use. We're holding the public hearing now as required by the ordinance. And with that, we've got some model motions for you. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. As we noted in the work session, the architect on the project is available as well to answer questions.
Do we have any questions for staff?
I have one. I just noticed in the documentation as it was up on the screen. There's a bit of a distinction on the property line that I just didn't understand. I didn't know if I missed the memo on that one. Can you explain that?
There are actually multiple parcels here that will need to be consolidated as part of this project. And so that is something that the staff is working on and reviewing separately, but that's correct that we've got a strip along the front and then there's two parcels there as well that will be combined. So ultimately it'll all be one piece and all conforming to the setbacks.
Any other questions for staff? Does Commissioner Ebler have any or hand raised? I can't see him.
I'm okay. My hand's not raised.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right,
Commissioner.
then. Do we have any questions for the architect? Okay, then we'll open the public comment then. George, you're up.
Okay, my name is George Lagrange. I live at 6601 South Lindy Court, directly across on the west side of the 30th East from the existing junkyard that's there. Basically, I look at it every day. I see 4 container ship containers there, junk pallets, Jersey barriers crumbling and in disrepair, aluminum culvert pipes. It really is an embarrassment since I think this is truly the gateway to Cottonwood Heights. And what is there right now is awful. And I have to see it every day. So this is good news to see this new plan. This will be a huge improvement based upon what's currently there. I think there's living there. I can see that there is room for a sidewalk. You'll get around to looking at that, but I believe there is room for a sidewalk. And I think that would be a good and a big improvement also. And it's good to see that those snowplows are going to find a home because I see them sitting out there and they're in various stages of assembly and disassembly. And in comparison to what UDOT has, it really looks pretty bad. So that will be welcomed. I wanted to ask one in the landscaping, of course, on the west side, please bring it on. More landscaping, the better. I thought there was always a plan on the existing structure for there to be landscaping, but apparently that didn't happen. I did notice that not mentioned at all in the plan, and my wife Sherry brought it up, was the glass recycling drop off that's on 30th East right now. Since that was put in there 2 years ago, it sounds like truly a car accident happening about every 10 or 15 minutes when people go to put their recycling glass in there. And it does create quite a bit of activity as far as cars in and out onto 30th East. And my wife did bring up the enforcement, the noise ordinance violation. There's a sign right on the existing structure that says noise ordinance enforced 9 PM to 7 AM. And I would like to ask the commission here, what is your mechanism for enforcing that? Because I've seen none of it. I could call when somebody's dumping trash at 1:30 in the morning, like they do frequently, I should say glass. And by the time that somebody from the Cottonwood Heights Police Department gets there, they're going to be long gone. So it's just like you can't put up speed limit signs and not enforce them. You can't have a noise ordinance put right on that container and not being enforced. So I would like to see some kind of enforcement mechanism, but hopefully that will be gone with the new Public Works building. I didn't see it in the plan, and I really hope not to see it in the plans. I'm all for recycling glass. I think there's a benefit to the community for that. But at the same time, I think we should be reasonable. And if there is a noise ordinance, then it needs to be enforced. You can't be ignored. And right now it's completely ignored. And it's awful. As far as the riparian zone, I have one comment to make. There is a fueling station right there, that's fairly close to the Cottonwood Creek. I don't know if that's an issue. The Walker family estate has a huge junkyard to the east of Cottonwood Creek. I don't know if that's an issue. It'll probably be grandfathered in. But if you've ever looked at that, it's a pretty awful sight. You can see it from Wasatch Boulevard if you look west off of that. And then there's retail locations right there that are adjacent to the creek. So I don't have a problem with that stuff. I'm just raising that as like, hey, did you happen to notice that? The last thing I would like to ask for is, I believe there's the plan can be accessed online somewhere. So I would like some information somewhere where I can find that plan. It looks good. And I really, really appreciate the fact that finally something is being done, because what is there right now is awful. I see it every day. And if you were in my position and you were looking at that right here from this beautiful building, you would have something, I'm sure you wouldn't like it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George. All right, is there anyone else here to speak on this item? Is there anyone? Sherry?
Sherry, can you please speak in the microphone? Thank you.
Oh, 30th East, but where's that recycling container? You said it's a brand new.
Up on Mill Creek, about 30 south on the east side. It's brand new recycling that has storage that's closed. That would probably help us.
Yeah.
I would prefer if there's somewhere else.
And it's
I think-
so it's rusted out. It's in such disrepair. It needs to be changed out
Okay.
to at least a newer container to get us through this.
All right,
because-
thank you for your comments. We have to move on to the item at hand. Regarding the recycling container, I would say that you have to bring it up with Public Works. It's not part of the purview of the Planning Commission. Or you could give general public comment at City Council, who may have more overlap with Public Works.
Yeah, I don't think you want to play.
Okay, all right, well, is there any other public comment about the project? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to close the public comment?
Move to close the public comment.
Okay.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've closed the public comment on this item. Is there any discussion on the item regarding the site plan approval of the new Public Works building?
Can we get the model motion up on the screen? If possible. Thanks. I move that we approve project SPL 22-002 based upon the findings for the approval outlined in the staff report. And I don't have any conditions.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second or any discussion? Okay, is there a second?
Second that.
Is there any discussion? All right, we'll call a vote. Commissioner Ebler,
Aye.
Sean, what's your last name?
Steinman.
Steinman, sorry about that. You're new. Commissioner Steinman,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel.
Yes.
Don't tell me. Shelton, I know Mike,
Yes.
and Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Allen, yes. All right, so that passes. So the site plan has been approved by the Planning Commission. I think regarding the other improvements on the area, we talked about this in the public or in the working session. I think it's shared. There's some concern about that facility and how it looks, as it is an important gateway into our community and city. And so as we continue to discuss the general plan, which is currently being discussed and will be open to more public comment in the future, it seems like a gateway zone should be applied to 30th East to address some of the visual and circulation issues along 3000 East. So I would like to continue those discussions as we continue to discuss the general plan. Any other comments before we move to the next item on the agenda? All right, the next item is project ZTA 19001 for a discussion and possible action on a proposed ordinance update relating to the sensitive lands evaluation and development standards, Sled's ordinance, section 19.72 of the zoning ordinance. We have a presentation from staff.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. I'll provide another overview for you of, as we did before, and we mentioned in the previous meeting, this is a very lengthy project that involves a lot of new updates. What we've got on the slides for tonight is just updates since the last month's meeting, but we're happy to pull up the ordinance and review anything, address any comments or concerns that you have. If you'd like to address any of the comments from earlier, we can certainly do that. The main feedback that we received from the last meeting was that there were several comments made about just trying to look at expanding certain buffers where possible. And that was the direction we received from the Planning Commission after the meeting, was to look into that. We have the original set of boundaries went all the way out to 125 feet, establishing buffer areas, and any property that touched those buffer zones would be considered part of the riparian protection area. For larger lots, we found that extending that total area from 125 to 150 feet, that would be feasible only on zones that require larger lot sizes. So moving on to the new changes, the larger lots are found in the F zones, which is the forestry, RR zones, which stands for rural residential zones, and then CR, our regional commercial zone. The newest addition, the newest amendment that you have before you has a buffer area, area A, going to 50 feet within the top of bank, B at 75 feet, C at 125, and then ending at 150 feet from the top of bank. For all other zones, it will remain the same as what has been previously discussed. Area A going 25 feet from top of bank, B at 50 feet, C at 100 feet, and D at 125. We've made changes to the buffer areas. It was initially in the applicability section. That has been moved. Now that we've got two separate sets of buffers, We decided to include all the applicability in with that section. And then we've clarified a few things that were pointed out last meeting, most notably that the top of bank could be established by a licensed surveyor, in addition to other types of specialists and scientists that were previously listed. And then added some language to allow the city's development review committee, it's a group of city staff, to make the decision if it's necessary to be verified on any given project. We made updates to the non-conforming use section, and when we use the word minor updates, that just means from last time, not that necessarily overall that this is a minor update. But we've made changes to that section to add references to the city code. Previously, it read like it was its own sort of approval. We wanted to clarify that any non-conforming use, a building that may be in one of those buffer zones where it wouldn't be allowed today under the current standards, those are allowed to remain. If you want to add on to those, there is a process. The normal non-conforming use expansion process requires approval by the appeals hearing officer at a public meeting. So we've added that all in. That's all still part of the process. That's a normal review for anywhere in the city. If you've got a house that doesn't meet setbacks for whatever reason, is non-conforming, and you want to do an addition, you've got to go through that. And so this now adds to that, and then also adds some specific criteria to these riparian buffer areas. Essentially, and this is the same as what's been discussed previously. But just as a refresher, any new addition cannot go closer to the water. And then there are a few other things that the building can't have a history of flooding. And there were some others, we can pull those up. But anyway, a few clarifications to that section, but that still remains in the ordinance. And then no additional changes to the other hazards. So we talked about steep slopes, fault zones, flood zones, liquefaction, all the remaining. Those are still as proposed and as you had reviewed last time. So based on that, we recommend forwarding a recommendation of approval to the city council. Because this is an amendment to the ordinance, it requires city council approval. Planning Commission is a recommending body. You are welcome to make a recommendation and include additional feedback or suggestions. We will continue, as we have been throughout the process, trying to implement all of the feedback we receive. Certainly open to making changes if desired. So we've got model motions for you, but with that, that's all I have. Any questions?
Can you speak to the comments about mechanized equipment?
Sure. Well, currently I was trying to look while the comments were being made. I think that's a good point, and if that's something that the Planning Commission would like us to look into, I do believe it does say that no heavy equipment.
Yeah, I can clarify. It limits the use of heavy equipment for certain uses and then defines heavy equipment.
Is heavy equipment different from mechanized equipment?
I can't find a reference to chainsaws or things with motors. Heavy equipment is defined as a vehicle or machine designed for construction or earth moving work, including but not limited to a backhoe, bulldozer, compactor, crane, dump truck, excavator, front loader, grader, scraper, skid steer loader, or tractor.
Can I ask a
And then with the regulatory agencies question, I do agree that we can clarify it better, but there is a line that addresses it in C on the, yeah, it's just section C. Cottonwood Heights does not assume authority over the requirements and processes of separate regulatory agencies. Now, I do think that can be clarified and more streamlined. There's no intention here to tell Salt Lake City Flood Control or Salt Lake County Flood Control they can't come in and maintain and enhance the creek and make sure it's safe.
But a public utility would not fall under that language. Is that right?
I would say they're a regulatory agency, and I think people coming in with a chainsaw is not prohibited in here that I can see. And if we need to clarify that, again, we're happy to.
I mean, this is in the same vein, I think, Mike, where you're going. If we were to add something along the lines of maintenance of grandfathered structures and rights of way and land for issues of safety, including sprinkler repair, fallen tree removal, tree trimming, including use of motorized and heavy equipment to perform such maintenance. You know, a valid point that if people are trying to just simply take care of what's there, I think our intention was that we wanted to make sure that you can take care of what you've already got. What we're concerned about is new stuff and what's going forward. So you know, hearing the concern.
That's how we interpret this.
Okay.
The non-conforming uses, if something has been existing, a use or structure was legally permitted and it is existing at the time the ordinance takes place and continues to exist in that state, it can be maintained and kept in perpetuity. The irrigation, the sprinkler change, I don't see where we wouldn't allow that. The only footnote requirement is that area A must be covered with a minimum 50% landscaping. That's the only note on irrigation. Again, I think you're right. The intention is to allow people to maintain and keep what they have.
Is that also true of stream bank? I mean, one of the comments was related to maintaining the stream bank.
Yeah.
That's not an existing structure, so I wonder if that.
Yeah, I believe it would be. I can go through and we can make sure that's clearly reflected, but maintaining the stream bank and making sure it has good integrity and is clear of debris that could be a hazard to public health, safety, or welfare is certainly within the purpose of this ordinance.
Well,
That's not
there's a-
reflected
yeah.
accurately. It should be.
There's an item there that says installation and maintenance of existing erosion control devices. Would that not? I believe that would be covered.
That seems like that would include Salt Lake County flood control. I mean, obviously, we want to have the power utility still needs to have access for tree maintenance as well. Do we feel comfortable that the way that the ordinance sits, that Rocky Mountain Power, for the sake of tree trimming, would have access? Is that explicit enough?
The intention, and we'll make it more clear.
Okay.
Do we know why we didn't qualify on real property ownership on this to the middle of the stream and to the banks instead? Why didn't we go to the middle of the stream or middle of the river on this current ordinance?
I think we actually might have had that at one point, but it was recommended to use the top of bank. I can't remember if that came from a comment or from the commission. I know
Because I
that
believe FEMA has regulations off of middle of river, middle of stream. So I think if we can maintain with kind of FEMA's regulatory.
Salt Lake County Flood Control regulates from top of bank.
Okay.
They have buffer areas and their own regulations that, in my experience, have always been from top of bank. I think that's probably what we emulated in other local ordinances. You know, they are the local flood control authority for more so than FEMA is in most cases.
And Sam did the deep dive on that one from the staff standpoint for us. That predated you, Eric, but she was thorough. I mean, there was like 5 governing authorities that she brought to us what would be most updated and current.
Perfect.
So the maintenance of the stream bank is always going to be in area A. The analysis required is the designation for that, I believe.
Yep.
So what would a homeowner have to do to maintain the stream bank? What is the analysis? And I apologize.
If they want to fortify the stream bank and add additional armoring is what it's called in here, they have to come in and meet with the DRC and lay out the plan for how to do that. And if the DRC feels that it's technical enough to need an expert, you know, an engineer's approval or something on it, then the DRC can require that.
How do you foresee that would go? Do you think this is going to dramatically restrict a homeowner's ability to shore that up?
I think the intent is to allow it to be shored up and to make sure it's shored up in proper ways. It's like any other hazard right now. If someone comes in and wants to build a building and we think there's a slope hazard or a fault hazard, it kicks in a DRC review process. So we can make sure that the way they mitigate that hazard is up to best practices and protects them and protects, those around them.
It seems to me like there were three main items that need to be better understood: emergency response restrictions, private property maintenance restrictions, and public utility expansion and maintenance restrictions. So emergency, private property, and public utilities could probably use some more clarification.
I do, fertilizer was brought up and there's no way around it that says you can't, fertilizer and pesticides shouldn't be applied to property that's, by than 20 feet of the top of the bank, but so it doesn't get in the waterway. If you want to look at changing that, we can, but that seems integral to the purpose of the ordinance.
You said 20, is it not 50?
It's area A, so
Area A,
50
so
feet
50
in
for some.
some instances, but 25 in others.
I think I feel a degree of comfort as we discuss this, that this is not the last that the issue is going to be discussed publicly, and that, after we finish, city council is going to go through their process as well. Really, we were fairly close to voting on this last time, but wanted to have our two new commissioners. Well, and additional public comment was hopeful as well in shaping things.
And I think the intent of the project is two-part: to protect the health and safety of the residents, and two, to improve the environmental protection of these critical riparian zones along Big and Little Cottonwood Creek. Similar riparian protection zones are very common in many municipalities, and including with many within Salt Lake County. So I think this isn't unprecedented.
And I think a lot of our concerns were the undeveloped areas, and allowing people that, for property right reasons, that have current existing properties, allow them the latitude to maintain what they've got.
Can we have more details on that, just as far as new development areas? Because I think a lot of these are going to be applicable, and the clarity issues that I think there's some concerns about are going to be applying to just active property rights that they want to be using in the space. And I think that that's probably the main concern. If we're looking to be for new developments and new developable areas, then I think we should maybe focus on that, just from, my 2 weeks of review on this and limitations in that.
And I would say, because that is the intent of the ordinance, I think there is a fair amount of clarity on, the intent is to protect the valuable natural resource that we have in our, severe drought. We drink this water, we depend on it. And so I don't know that there's any question about the idea that these zones are, the 2,000 feet of development in zone C, I think I remember correctly. I can't remember which zone was which. But I do think it is clear. I think the intent is best use of the land that we have in stewardship, I would suppose, within our city boundaries. Now, I guess my follow-up question is there one of those particular items that you see as concerning or too restrictive in the terms of development or redevelopment?
I think potentially we'd want to look at more developable land and not existing property ownership or existing properties that have current residents in them potentially, just because a lot of those restrictions are not as clear as they would potentially want to be. So I guess in those three sections, as far as being able to actually have emergency trucks go down there and actually repair, if you're looking at public utilities, go down there to repair. So all the existing issues that we'd be looking at. So I think we might want to just propose to potentially refine those a little bit more in this rendition before we pass it on, or potentially pass it on and put the recommendation that we do pass it on to city council with recommendations to have some repair on those areas and some refinement to those areas.
let me just agree with you that, and, you know, we have the least amount of time invested in this, and those of you who spend a lot of time probably don't appreciate much that those of us who are short to it will, delay you further if we had a shot to, but, I think, the language we have matters, as was said. The language makes a big difference, and property rights matter. And we don't, in my view, want to make a recommendation where the language is not clear and where there is some ambiguity about the property rights we would be claiming for the city. So I think there are some things we know we can clean up. We should clean them up before we move forward.
So I believe that you had made 3 recommendations of what needs to be cleaned up. So before I think we make that recommendation, it might be worthwhile for us to evaluate those.
Do you have any questions? Mike, do you have?
I'm a little confused at what we're evaluating. I have notes to add in clarity that emergency management is allowed and regulatory agencies and utility companies can continue their practices in a way that meets the purposes of the ordinance. Regarding being framed around development, Sleds as a whole is an ordinance that's geared around development. Most of it doesn't trigger unless you're developing or expanding or modifying something. If you already have something, you can keep having it, you know, really without any interruption by this ordinance. So I don't know what is meant by we need to clarify or make this more specific to new development. I think it is. That was the directive we had when we prepared this whole ordinance. It's under Sleds, which is a new development code. It's not a property maintenance code. So that's, you know, we've taken our best shot at doing that here. So I would just need more specific direction from the full commission to know where to go with this.
Maybe it's a slide explaining the 3 items, the emergency response, restrictions or not restrictions. If there's something that is already in there that would allow emergency response. The second one was private property maintenance, just making sure that there's nothing in there that prevents it. And if there isn't, then I think you can state that. And then public utilities expansion and maintenance restrictions. Clarity on if that's allowed or not.
And I'd be comfortable, the relationship that we've kind of pushed back and forth, that's a question. I don't know that we necessarily need to codify those issues. I think we can send it to the city council in its current form with the question is the ordinance as it sits capable of responding to this in the future, long after we're gone? Is it going to be responsive to that? And if the council does not feel that it is, then they could choose to modify it and make it more explicit. But I hate to just expand it. So, and anyway.
I would agree. I concur with that. I think it'd be important to highlight the concern, those 3 concerns we said on a slide talking about sleds. But I concur that I don't think we need to at this point go into the ordinance and start looking to make changes, because it sounds to me, based on what Mike was saying, it's there.
I would just say, and this will be the last thing, and then I'd entertain a motion after Commissioner Chapel says what she's going to say. But I think we want to forward a unified vote on this to a recommendation. And so if commissioners, in particular, the ones that haven't been through this the whole time, are not feeling comfortable about it, I'd rather give them time than forward a mixed message.
And the comment that I had was, I didn't read any intent in these provisions that there should be any restriction on emergency management or utility maintenance. And so, in discussion, I'm not yet proposing, I think it would be reasonable to that the conditions are that with the understanding that there is no restriction of those two items, right? Those are safety issues. Those are traditionally important items for cities. But then also to say, you know, the discussion about clarification on, you know, with a note saying clarification on property maintenance is a concern that we'd like to see the city council refine. I mean, this is the hard part about the theory, right? I mean, as far as we're looking at the intent of the language and the city council are beholden to their constituents. So that kind of seems like a good purpose, you know, to be pushed to the city council. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, if that's reasonable. shall we
Having
say.
some experience.
Yeah, a little. I think in my experience, the recommendation that came from the Planning Commission meant a lot to me. And when I felt like it had been thoroughly reviewed by the Planning Commission, at some level, it took some pressure off of me because I knew the ideas had been fully vetted. And so I assumed, and I believe rightfully so, that the Planning Commission was very careful in their vetting of these things. And it's interesting, as I look at the screen here, I see one of those examples that kind of disturbs me. You know, if you want to do a minor ground disturbing activity, which means dig a hole, then you have to have it reviewed. That kind of disturbs me. I don't want to think that a property owner who owns a home and wants to dig a hole 50 feet from.
It doesn't have to be reviewed. It's just A.
It's AR.
In the current draft here,
It's AR on the screen. And
the one I printed, is this the third?
Minor ground disturbing activity or minimal grading.
Any action not, okay. Oh, was there another one?
You're looking at the.
So yes, when it is close to the bank, yeah.
So within 50 feet of the bank, if in the example used earlier, you lost a tree and you wanted to grind the stump out, if you were reading the language carefully, you would be required to have that reviewed. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that was not the intent of the language. The intent of the language wasn't to hang up the person who wants to remove a stump from a dead tree. But that's what it says. And I do think the language matters. And I think as I look at it, you know, those are the kinds of things you say, well, that's not really what we wanted. That's where the review to me makes sense to say, if I'm an existing property owner and I own that stream, I own the property underneath that stream, no one in the state owns the stream. But if I own the property underneath the stream and it's my ground, how much burden does the public need to place on me to maintain a good balance between my rights as a property owner and their rights as the community? And to dig a hole within 50 feet of the stream probably, in my view, is going too far. That's not a good balance.
All right. Well, I would entertain a motion.
Let me clarify again. We've talked a lot about riparian standards. What you're voting on is much, much more than that. It's the whole sensitive lands evaluation and development standards code with a lot of new fault line study information and steep slopes and, you know, all the other stuff we've been talking about since January.
So, you know, this is an interesting situation because we are now talking kind of about opinions, right? I mean, the riparian ordinances and the studies that were used were based upon the research about the health of waterways. If that, is that a fair? That's my understanding. And the having something that's enforceable and actionable by the city is really what we're trying to establish. The minutia of, is there a desire to say stump grinding's okay, but building a swimming pool is not? Like, like how detailed do we get in this ordinance? I guess maybe that's something I'd like clarified as far as how far do we need to go? Because what I'm hearing, this what's considered maintenance can be, you can drive a truck through it, right? It can be fairly wide understanding. And so the idea of specificity and, writing every step, which tool can be used, it's this tool or that is the chainsaw, not, this blade can be 4 inches long or what, I'm not sure that that's the intent of the ordinance. So I guess what would be the end goal of extending the refinement of that particular item?
May I jump in? How long have we been working on this specific plan, and what kind of studies have we had done on this specific plan up to this point?
On the sleds ordinance,
Specific
2 years.
So we're 2 years in on this.
We've consulted with ecology professors at the university, FEMA, the Forest Service, Salt Lake County Flood Control, other cities that have riparian ordinances. Again, it's all based in research and expert recommendations.
Half a dozen departments of the University of Utah and Utah State in addition.
And we've been working on this one specifically since January or for 2 years?
It's been in front of the Planning Commission since January. Staff, the project file has a 2019 date on it, so it's been, under development on and off for, 2+ years.
And I believe it's been kind of updates to staff. I think I saw it before January, if I recall. Is that correct?
Correct.
So from your perspective, and this is my first being here, from your perspective, do you feel like it's been carefully vetted out with the alternatives of the things that we had discussed tonight with those 3 different items? You feel like it's been appropriately vetted out, or do you think if we spent more time on this, we would find more items that we might need to have a little bit more special look and maybe get, third parties involved as well to do additional studies?
This is maybe 1% of the whole. So I mean, there are dives that could be done on each one of those percentage points. And we felt comfortable that the due diligence has occurred thus far.
And I guess that was my comment about the city council. The city council will likely come at it with the same perspective, that the due diligence has been done on it in the work that we've done to this point. Not to say that they won't look at it, but forwarding something that doesn't fully meet your standards and saying we expect that the city council will fix the deficiencies in it is probably not the safest path forward.
And I don't know that we would agree that they're deficiencies, to be honest, Mike. I mean, I don't know that these are more, if you don't feel like this, we feel comfortable as the concerns that have been expressed, we feel like the ordinance protects the issues that have been brought to us, that it allows for property rights to be protected, and that the ingress and egress, that's presumed in the current ordinance. And if from their standpoint, from an enforcement standpoint, if it needs to be more explicit, then we would, of course, defer to their ability to be more explicit in lining that out. And they could potentially, as has happened before, they can push it back to us if they felt like something needed to be addressed more fully as well.
And I would concur with Commissioner Mills that I don't see it as a deficiency.
I do see Commissioner Ebeler is raising his hand online as well.
I was just about to speak up just in case the Chair Allen couldn't see it, but I agree with Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Chapel on this, in that anytime you get involved with ordinances that are as large as this, it's hard to always get it right, 100% of the time. But at some point, you do have to move forward, recognizing the fact that there are legislative remedies in terms of if there are things that do become where the balance between the public and the private interests are out of balance, the ordinance is amendable, and certainly the public outcry would demand immediate amendment to it. And so on that piece of it, I've been down the road on large pieces of legislation like this before, and it's one of those things of you try to be diligent, you try to get it right the first time, but knowing full well that there are the legislative remedies that can be enacted after the fact. And the thing is that the reality is once it's enacted, if there are these minutia that would get flagged as deficient, they're gonna raise themselves pretty quickly in the process, and that's where I think my comfort level is okay on this going forward. Just wanted to kind of give my 2 cents on that.
I do want to clarify just pragmatically in Commissioner Shelton's example, if someone was digging a small hole or grinding a stump, if that were, say you're in the 50-foot zone, it's 49 feet away from the creek bank. Yeah, it says analysis required. What that is probably one meeting with the DRC to lay out, hey, this is what I want to do. Here's an aerial image. This is where the stump is. It's this far away from the creek, and the DRC says, yeah, go ahead. Whereas if it's, I want to raise my whole backyard or lower my whole backyard along the top of the bank by 1 foot, which is still minor grading, but it's 1 foot all along and it's right next to the top of the bank, then maybe we need some more analysis. There is that DRC level discretion there. And it's not all going to be the same extensive DRC process where we require experts to come in and certify. That's only if the DRC finds it necessary. And if it's something that clearly doesn't impact that riparian waterway, then the DRC is not going to, it's not going to be a burdensome process.
And I think those comments are segue perfectly in terms of what I was saying in that the legislation gives a lot of authority to the DRC and pushes that responsibility there. And if the public finds that the DRC is too heavy-handed, they're going to let the mayor and council and the planning commission know very, very quickly that something's not working. And so either administrative remedies will be put into place, or if there's just too much of a disagreement in terms of the interpretation of the statute that was codified, the legislation is going to get amended. I mean, it's just the public will basically determine the outcomes of those small tweaks, and it happens. And the thing is as cities and municipalities mature, they oftentimes want to relook at things like this to say, okay, we didn't necessarily think that we would have to look at it this way, but now we do, or the situation has occurred. The legislation or the ordinance as it stands isn't quite clear, so let's clarify it. But I think Mike's comments on that were dead on in terms of how this actually works administratively, or should.
Mike, can you describe the ways that the city has communicated the discussion about the sleds ordinance? There are questions about how
Publicly?
Yeah, just the communication that this is.
So typically when you have look at it, again, not the riparian section of the sleds ordinance, but the sleds ordinance in general, you have a citywide ordinance. It's not specific to an address in the city, with a conditional use or a site plan that's specific to one address. You send mailers within a certain radius. You do other things. We post on the city website. We post on the state noticing website, and these are things you can sign up for email notifications when they come out. But for sensitive lands, we've published a newsletter article. I've already committed to some members of the public, including Mr. Berry, that we will publish another newsletter article in September, the citywide newsletter that goes to every resident's door, that this ordinance is being considered. I can't put the entire ordinance in the city newsletter, but I can direct people to where that's published online. We can put it on the front page of the city website. We can take every feasible measure that we can, short of sending a letter to every single household in the city. I don't feel comfortable as staff only sending letters to people along riparian waterways, because what about people on fault lines? What about people by steep slopes? What about people in liquefaction zones? Again, then we're noticing the entire city, which is not our standard practice for citywide ordinance amendments. But there are a lot of ways to be involved, and I think through this process, we've seen a lot of public involvement. So I would, say it's working. And again, the city council gets another shot at this with their own round of public feedback and public input. So we've gone, much further than the state minimums in terms of noticing to try our best to get the word out. Each draft of this ordinance has been published on the city website. Again, there's been one article in the city newsletter and there'll be another.
Can you, if you were to roughly estimate how many people have made public comments on this issue since January?
Good question. I don't feel comfortable guessing. I'd have to check the minutes and we could get you an exact number, but I know we've heard a lot of public input and we've seen people in the seats at every meeting.
I'm guessing it's over 100 just for our 2 new commissioners since January.
So going back to my comments, really whenever I hear concerns about ordinance written, especially legislative bodies, and there might be some holes to be poked in this, I think from my perspective on this is if there are a few holes that are minor or even more extensive, I'm going to reflect on the other new commissioner here this evening. I think it'd be a disservice of us to, even if there is any minor ambiguity within what's written, to continue to pass this and with positive recommendation, even if there's 2 or 3 words off, and if it's ambiguous in one way or fashion, it would be a disservice to us to say, hey, there's a positive recommendation. Now, once again, this is my 2nd week with commission, and I know you guys have spent a ton of time on this, but if there is anything that is ambiguous of anything that we are approving here to pass positive recommendation to the planning commission, even in the back of our mind, or I'm sorry, to the community council, then it becomes a little bit more difficult for us. So if there is any shed of ambiguity in this, then we want to make sure that that clarity is there. And from this perspective, it seems like there are just a couple areas that we might just need to make that refinement. And if we can have that refined and then pass it, I think that could be positive, where let's have this refined and that's what we're passing to the council. But I don't necessarily know if that would be the right process with this.
So I would, to Commissioner Chappell's point and to Mike Johnson's point, I think you two are going to have to be very, very explicit about exactly what your issues are, because I don't know the rest of us are seeing it. So if you have specific lines that you would like to see changed and edited, I don't know that it's getting more experts. I don't know that the answer is that we haven't asked the right people the right questions. So if you feel like it's unclear, we would presume that you've read through it, and if you have edits, the ability to make those conditions right now, right here, let's do it. Let's make the motion, and then what you can do is put conditions on there to make the edits that will make you feel comfortable. And I would say, well, go ahead, make those edits. Let's add it right now.
Or let's at least deliberate what they are in specificity. I mean, we're a deliberative body, and ultimately the reason there's more than one person up here is that everyone up here has good thoughts, but let's get the ideas on the table and discuss them, and let's see if there's a way to move forward.
And once there's a motion, the ability to make a friendly amendment, and then to vote on a friendly amendment too, if there's something you see that the language could be improved.
Point of information, Chairman. Are we in discussion? We're just in discussion currently on the amendments itself, correct? There's not a motion on the table?
There's no motion,
Okay, thank you.
but I would entertain one.
I move to forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for project ZTA-19-001 based upon the recommended findings outlined in the staff report.
Do we have a second?
I would second that motion.
Any discussion?
Just staff clarification, we will, add clarity for emergency maintenance and the authority of utilities to do their standard work. Again, that's the intent of the ordinance. It'll be clarified.
Do we want to formally codify that as a finding or a condition?
I'm sorry, Mr. Barry, there's not public comment at this
How
time.
we're gonna move things.
So-
We need to maintain public order. I'm sorry.
3H, heavy equipment,
I'm sorry, we need to maintain public order.
3C and 3.
There's
Mr.
not-
Barry, you need
So-
to sit down.
I'll sit down,
Out of order.
but this is wrong. Those are 2-ton boulders.
So
How do you move
I would
those
like to
things?
understand how to move forward on under the proper procedures to note Mike Johnson's comment about the clarification. Should I be proposing
think
an
you could
amendment?
Propose an amendment.
Okay, I'd like to
Yes.
propose an amendment to Commissioner Ebler's motion that that staff clarifies that the ordinance does not impinge the ability of emergency managers and utility managers to maintain, to take care of public interest with respect to utility management and emergency management.
I accept the friendly amendment.
So it would be a second on the friendly amendment, and then we have to discuss a friendly amendment and then vote on the friendly amendment.
I would second the friendly amendment.
Any discussion on the amendment?
Would we like to also add private property maintenance in that as well? So we would have emergency response, private property maintenance, and public utility maintenance.
My thought on that is that it requires more clarification on the language in the ordinance that addresses private maintenance, such as minor grading and what we mean by maintenance.
Which would be clarified through a DRC process, is that correct?
I think I heard concern that maybe for minor maintenance, a DRC meeting should not be required.
It would be required. If it's an AR, it would just be very simple. It's going to depend on the complexity of what's being proposed. But like I said, if it's a stump 49 feet away from the top of the bank, they're going to come in and sit down and show us an aerial image and say it's there, and we'll say, okay. That's allowed, that's built into this.
My concern is when ordinances like this become so specific that they end up becoming not practical.
Mhm.
I'd like to call the question on the friendly amendment.
So moving it,
No, meaning that we take
Oh.
it to an immediate vote.
take it to a vote,
Yeah,
which was just the emergency response and public utilities portion.
and the staff clarification of that as a condition of approval.
All right. So Commissioner Ebler,
Aye.
Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Sean,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Allen, yes. Is there a second, or
So now we're back to the main motion with
Yeah,
the, as amended.
any further discussion? Further amendments? Hearing none, I will call the vote. Commissioner Ebler,
Aye.
Commissioner Shelton,
No.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Sean,
Steinman.
Steinman. Gonna write it down.
I need more time to spend on this. I've had about a week on it, so I'm gonna say no.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel,
Yes.
Commissioner Allen. No. But I think it still passes. So we'll forward a positive recommendation on the Sleds ordinance to the city council with the amendment as noted. All right, we have the next item on the agenda is the approval of the planning commission meeting minutes. First ones are from July 6th, 2022. Is there any discussion on those minutes?
Move to approve the planning commission meetings from July 6th, 2022.
I have to have, I'm sorry, one correction in that my last name is misspelled. It should be O-N and not E-N. So if that can be noted, then I'm fine. Yeah, I could.
I will amend my motion since there wasn't a second.
Thank you, Commissioner Evler.
So the motion is to approve the minutes with the correction noted.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Mills? And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Then we'll move to approval of the July 20th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any discussion? Do we have a motion?
Move to approve the July, was that 2022? July 20th? Yeah, July 20th, 2022 minutes.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
I
Any
have to
opposed?
abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson abstains. And any opposed? All right. Then do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, commissioners. Thanks, staff.